everyone. Welcome back. Let's finish up week one of the spring 2021 semester. Let me just first reiterate what I said in that email this morning. I really like the perspective that a lot of you brought forth and what you found most intriguing about mass media. I mean, there's a lot out there right now. And especially over the last year, there's been so much going on. A lot of crazy things, and the future nobody can predict right now because who knows what's going to happen. But it is very interesting. And I don't know if I think I might have said this in my video on last Thursday. But just to give you an idea of how crazy things have been. When right before we went to spring break in the spring of 2020 in my mass media class, one of the things that I had showed the students was an article, because one of the things I try to do is whenever there's something currently going on, no matter what our chapter is, I'll go ahead and I'll talk about it. We'll have a discussion about it, as much as we can discuss. But we will definitely try and talk about it because there's so much that's always constantly changing. Before they went on spring break last year, one of the articles said that Netflix was in serious financial trouble. Okay, Netflix was now starting to lose subscribers. Of course, this was only months after Disney Plus had come along. And of course, not only for the whole Disney package, but you Marvel Comics people and you Star Wars people, that was just something you were like, hey, I got to have this. And in some cases, you chose between one or the other instead of having both. So Netflix was in a little bit of a trouble, and then all of a sudden, COVID hit. Everybody had to go home, and next thing you know, people are all over Facebook saying, hey, what can I binge on Netflix now? What can I binge on Netflix now? And of course, Netflix is now doing just fine. I mean, they'd like to be doing better, but they now have so much competition. It's crazy. And that was great. A lot of you had touched on things like that, about what big tech is doing right now and what they shouldn't be doing, and some of those things that are intriguing you. But one of the things that, near and dear to my heart, was that some of you, it was like 4 or 5 of you, had mentioned radio. And I'm an old radio guy. That's where I got my best professional experience. And let me just go ahead and go back a little bit. I didn't tell you a little bit about myself, and I just want to tell you a little bit so you know who you're dealing with between now and May 11th. Again, my name is Mike Eccles, and I am now in my 22nd year here at Bergen Community College, having started this semester for the first time as the chair of the communication department. No big deal. It's not a whole lot of extra money at all, that's for sure. Just a lot of more work. But, when I was in high school, at Lyndhurst High School, in southern Bergen County, broadcasting, it was something I immediately was drawn to. And I actually got my first non-paying broadcasting job when I was 17 years old, right after high school. I had started, right before I even took my first class at Bergen. I was a student at Bergen. I did color commentary for high school football games on something that's been defunct now for about 35 years. It was called Meadowlands Cablevision. Now, when you had cable TV in southern Bergen County, it was only about 12 towns. Lyndhurst, North Arlington, Kearney, Wallington, Rutherford, East Rutherford, Karlstad. You got it from Meadowlands Cablevision. And what we would do is on a Saturday, we would go to a high school football game. This is before the Friday night games. A lot of people didn't have lights yet. Saturday afternoon game, we'd tape it, and then we'd play it on Meadowlands Cable. It was like Channel 3 on your cable box. And we would play it on a Tuesday night. And it was great because, I was every Tuesday night, I'm on TV, and I was 17, turning 18 years old. But unfortunately for my career, it had to take a sidetrack because I didn't do well at Bergen. I mean, I'm still, 38 years since I was a student at Bergen, and I'm still on academic probation. So I ended up doing like a lot of your friends and family did, went down to Hackensack just off of Main Street. I walked into the recruiter's office and joined the United States Marine Corps, which thank God I did because I needed my ass kicked, and they happily obliged. But when I got out, I started from scratch, whole new focus, and I went and got my bachelor's degree at Kane University. And I'm sure a lot of you know where Kane is, exit 140 off the Parkway, right there on Morris Avenue in Union. and I had a great time there. But what's more is I did a radio show on the college radio station. And after a while, it picked up and it got pretty popular. It was nice. It was Friday afternoons during drive time from like 4 to 6 or 2 to 4, something like that. And I had a great time with it. And then I went to graduate school. And I got my master's degree at Indiana State University in Terre Haute, Indiana. And not long after I got there, I was looking for some way to earn some extra money. I applied and I got hooked up with one of the top radio stations. Now, a top radio station out in Terre Haute, Indiana, remember, New York City's market number 1 radio market in America. LA's number 2, Chicago's number 3. Terre Haute at the time was market 181. So a tiny little radio market. But you know what? I was on the air overnight, 6 hours each weekend, sometimes Friday night into Saturday, Saturday into Sunday. So I'd work like 12 hours each weekend. Of course, it would screw up my sleep the rest of the week. But at least I was getting on the air, and I got pretty popular so that when I graduated with my master's degree, I graduated on a Saturday. 2 days later, that Monday morning, I was on the morning show, and I did morning radio in Terre Haute at 100.7 Mix FM for 3 years, and I had such a good time. The only problem was that even though we had 50,000 watts, like any other big radio station in New York City, we were one of the only radio stations in Terre Haute that had 50,000 watts. Now, what that means is that you could go about 40, 50 miles, and you could still hear our station clearly. And it was always interesting because, I'd be 30, 40 miles away. I'd go into a store. I'm buying something, and a young lady would say, well, is there anything else? And I'd say, oh, no, ma'am, that's it. Oh, my God, you're Mike Eccles from XFM. I listen to you and Bo Richards every single morning. You guys are so funny. No, I'm not making that up. That's exactly how they sounded. So I did that for 3 years. Unfortunately, as I said, New York's market number 1, LA's number 2, Chicago's number 3. Terre Haute was market 181. So every 2 weeks, those were Terre Haute paychecks, and they weren't very big. So I started supplementing my income by, I would do morning radio, and then I'd go to Indiana State and teach some classes in the afternoon. And then I realized I can make more money teaching and not have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning anymore, or 2:30, because I would have to be in by 4. At the latest, 4:30 a.m., because I was the producer of the show also, besides hosting, and there was a lot of stuff that I had to do. So I ended up teaching, and then, of course, I missed my mother's lasagna, so I came back to New Jersey in the fall of 1999, and I've been here at Bergen ever since. But I also did some television, too. And I think it was really a smart move for me to be able to teach about broadcasting, because I grew up in the New York City area, always had access. I mean, you could walk into Manhattan at any point. You take the train, New Jersey trains, you go into Manhattan. You can visit all the different networks and everything else. You have the networks headquartered, 10, 12 miles from where you're sitting right now, from where you are watching me. But to grow up in this area and have all access to the number 1 television market, and then to go out in Terre Haute and realize that not only is television expensive, but if you don't have that kind of money, well, it's fly by the seat of your pants television. To give you an example, take a look at my YouTube channel. I have a whole video. It's about 40 minutes long. What I did for a TV station, the Fox affiliate out in Terre Haute, is they didn't have news. So I was the face of the station, and I would promote a lot of their different programs. And I would try to do it as best I could in as funny as a manner I could. But boy, it was fly by the seat of your pants television. I'm talking like super cheap, inexpensive. But you know what? I was on TV 5, 6, 12 times a day. What the hell? Anyway, so that's some of my professional background. And I still actually have a podcast out there. It's on BuzzFeed. Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout is where my podcast is. You don't have to listen to it. It's old 50s and 60s music, because it's something. I want to do a podcast, but I want to do music that nobody's listening to, or that you can't really find on the radio anymore. So, and my podcast is found on iTunes. You can find it on Spotify and Pandora and some other places. So that's my professional background. So when I saw that some of you had written about what's intriguing about mass media, that radio, of course, I was very happy. Now, in chapter 1 of your textbook, and if you don't have the book yet, that's okay. I do strongly recommend you get the online version. It's just so much cheaper. Okay? It's interesting about chapter 1 because they talk about the different media companies. Of course, since this book went to print, things have drastically changed. Of course, this book went to print long before COVID happened. But even before COVID was happening, we're seeing this whole change on the landscape. You know, for example, when you think of the major media companies, okay, these are the major ones right here because they're all affiliated with the 4 major television networks, which I find very interesting that these networks are now having less and less relevance. For example, as you can see, Disney owns ABC, ESPN, and of course Disney Plus and anything affiliated with the Disney Channel or anything. You have Viacom, which owns CBS, Paramount Pictures, MTV, Nickelodeon, and many others. You have Comcast, which not only has Comcast, the cable network, the cable company, but you have the NBC TV network, Telemundo, USA Network, MSNBC. And then finally you have News Corp, which is Fox and Fox News. And you're now starting to see whether it's Netflix, whether it's Hulu, whether it's Amazon Prime, you're starting to see more of an influence coming from these other different places, kind of taking away a little bit of the relevance from the major networks. And I'm really curious to see, as we go into the future, is how the television networks are going to survive. Because right now, you know, with the exception of live sports, and especially the NFL, they're really not making a whole lot of money in advertising revenue. I mean, when you talk about ratings, how many people are actually watching network television or even cable television, it's so minuscule compared to what it was, say, only 3 or 4 years ago. And one of the things I used to do, as a matter of fact, it has gotten so bad that there was a website that up until a year ago, I would use in class to show you the weekly television ratings. They stopped doing it. They don't even do it anymore because it doesn't have the relevance it used to. There are still some places that do the ratings, but they're really small. And this is because of what's going on with all these apps. Now, the funny thing is, I'll ask students in class and they'll say, "Oh, I don't watch television." Yes, you do. No, you don't watch television in the sense that you're not sitting in your parents' living room with that screen in front of you on the big, you know, case or on the big cabinet. But I'm walking to class and I got students sitting in the hallways maybe an hour before their next class, and what are they doing? They're sitting next to an outlet in the hallway, of course, because they want to plug in their tablet or their phone or their laptop, and they're watching something. They're watching one of the apps. They're watching something from Netflix, from Hulu, from Amazon, or whatever app that they're using. Okay, Apple TV or whatever it is that they're connected with, and they're watching TV. They're just not watching in the old traditional sense. Now, up until this past 3 months, of course, when they measure some of these ratings, they do it in quarters. Well, up until the end of September, the most watched television network in America, I mean, we're talking all of cable, and even with some of the networks, was the Fox News Channel. Fox News Channel was far and away, and it's been the number 1 news channel for about 70 months or something like that. And we're talking several years. And then in the past 2 years, it's been the most, or 3 years, it's been the most watched cable network, period. I mean, more than USA Network, more than Bravo or any other. MTV, all of them. Fox News Channel. But Fox News Channel hasn't been around nearly as long as some of the others. As a matter of fact, Fox itself, when it comes to television, is a relative newcomer. And I want to give you a little story on how that all happened. See, for the longest time in America, when you watched what is the most powerful television medium or television program, and that is the National Football League, for the longest time, starting with the early 1950s, CBS, the television network, had the National Football League. Made a lot of money, especially for those of you who are football fans. You know about the great 1958 game between the Giants and the Colts, supposedly the greatest game ever played. I don't think so because the Giants lost in overtime. But that was watched by over 70 million people at a time when we only had like 260 million people in America. So this was a major television event. And ever since then, it's been recognized that if you have television with the NFL, you are going to do very well. Now, up until 1986, there were only the three networks, television networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. And up until 1986, cable television had arrived, but really wasn't grabbing as much audience as it does today, or would eventually do, especially in the early part of the 2000s, especially when you saw FX really take off with some of their original programs. And USA with like Monk and some of their other series. So for the longest time, you had CBS would get the NFL games. And then in 1960, when the American Football League arrived, NBC would get their rights. Later on, ABC would get Monday Night Football. And then when a company that would be, of course, later on Disney would grab them all, but a company called Cap Cities bought ESPN and ABC, they would have both the Monday night game and the Sunday night game. And that's the way it was. Every 4 years, they walked into the NFL, renegotiated their contract, and that's what it was. That's the way it was going to be. Now, when the NFL did, of course, merge in 1970, of course, you now had conferences. So, CBS then would have the NFC, and NBC would have the AFC. That's the way it's going to be. That's the way it's always been. So now it's the end of the 1993 season. It's January 1994. All the networks are coming in to Commissioner Paul Tagliabue, the NFL commissioner. Let's renegotiate the contracts. CBS, we're going to get the NFC again, as we've had since the 1950s. NBC, you're going to get the AFC games like you've had since forever. And, of course, ABC will get Monday Night Football, ESPN, Sunday Night Football. That's the way it's going to be. Well, then comes a guy by the name of Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch owned a company called News Corp. Now, at the time, he also owned the Fox television network, which was languishing. Fourth place, I mean, it was like well into fourth place. It only arrived in 1986 as a network and would only program one night over the next 3 or 4 years. So in 1986, they only focused on late night. 1987, they focused on Sunday night. And that, of course, is when the Simpsons were born. 1988, they focused on Saturday night. So then they only had Saturday, Sunday night. Then in 1989, they focused on Monday nights. And that's where like Beverly Hills 90210 came. And then later on Melrose Place. And so by the time 1994 had arrived, they were now broadcasting 7 days a week. But their shows couldn't get any ratings. A lot of cable companies weren't picking up the Fox network. And what's more, in a lot of small markets, like say like Terre Haute, they only had 3 over-the-air networks. And that was already ABC, NBC, and CBS. The station that I worked at, Fox 38, was ABC 38. It was an ABC affiliate. So now Murdoch wants to get involved. So here's what happens. 1994, after the NFL had just about finished negotiating, Rupert Murdoch, the president of News Corp, which owns Fox, he calls up the commissioner of football. He says, listen, how's your negotiation going? Well, CBS is going to give us like $650 million for the next 4 years. He says, I'll give you $1.1 billion. Whoa! Now, of course, you've probably heard the old saying, if you want to make money, you got to spend money. Well, Murdoch put up some big bucks. And, of course, Tagliabue went wild. CBS, of course, did all they could with their companies in Viacom. They tried to scrape as much money as they could, but they simply couldn't match. So now, all of a sudden, Fox has the NFL, or at least the NFC. Now, this was major because remember, he's trying to promote his fourth-rated network. You got ABC, NBC, CBS, and then you've got Fox. And about the only show that was actually showing any kind of ratings at the time was Married with Children. But here's what he did, is he gets the NFC package that CBS had for the longest time. And why not? Here are the top 15 biggest television markets in America. Number 1, New York City, which included the New York Giants, NFC team. Number 2, Los Angeles, which included at the time the Los Angeles Rams, NFC. Number 3 largest market, Chicago, which includes the Chicago Bears, NFC. Number 4, Philadelphia, which includes the Philadelphia Eagles, NFC. Number 5, Dallas, which includes the Dallas Cowboys, NFC. Number 6, San Francisco, which includes the San Francisco 49ers, NFC. Number 8, Atlanta, which includes the Atlanta Falcons, NFC. Number 9, Washington, D.C., which includes the Washington football team, NFC. Detroit, number 11, the Detroit Lions, NFC. Number 12, Phoenix, which includes the Arizona Cardinals, NFC. 13, Tampa St. Pete, which includes the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, NFC. Number 14, Seattle, which included Seattle Seahawks, NFC. And finally, number 15, Minneapolis, which included the Minnesota Vikings, NFC. So what Murdoch did by spending that kind of money is he now put himself in a position where if you wanted your football team in these major markets, you better make sure your cable company's got Fox. And they did. And you better make sure an affiliate. As a matter of fact, in Terre Haute, I watched this happen. I was there when this happened. I watched within a week after this deal was done, the ABC and affiliate in Terre Haute flipped to a Fox affiliate. Just like that. Why? Because we're only, in the Indianapolis Colts were only an hour away, but they still had only been in Indianapolis for about a decade. But longtime football fans were either Bears fans, Packers fans. Colts, I don't care about them. I'm a Packer or a Chicago Bear fan. Remember, we were only a couple hours from Chicago, and they had been around since 1920, so people, were very much Bear fans. And that's what happened, is that as he now started carrying the NFL, which he still has today, the NFC package, he had all these markets, started to make some money, started to make a lot of money. That, of course, led to the founding of the Fox News Channel, and then eventually having the kind of money to put together his network to where he could go after shows like eventually, 7 years after he made this deal, he premiered a show on Fox called American Idol. And American Idol will be the number 1 rated show on television in America for 8 consecutive years. At some points, having an average audience of 35 million people. And of course, their final shows would sometimes top close to 50 million people. So that was one of the best deals ever made in television history. But now with this changing landscape, who knows what's going to happen. All right, here's your assignment. Go get the book. That's it. And be reading up on Chapter 2, which is books, because we're going to be talking about books come Tuesday morning. All right? You guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday.